So, of course, I want to start by saying thank you, everyone, for joining. My name is Cody Armstrong, and today we're talking about the essentials of Onshape. So, the goal today is that I wanted to give new users out there an introduction into Onshape and learn kind of the essentials that you need to build simple parts, assemblies, and drawings. Can think of this as a crash course in Onshape, and the idea behind it is to give those new users an easy way to get started. Now, as always with these webinars, we really encourage you to ask any questions that you'd like. There's a questions dialog um, in the GoToWebinar control panel. Feel free to ask any question, and I'll do my best to stop and address the questions from time to time. So let's dig into things. Now, before I begin, I always like to talk a few things about what I like about Onshape in general and just some of the things that Onshape is trying to accomplish. And one of the first that I like to mention is our mission statement. That is getting everyone working together with CAD on any device, anywhere. And that includes mobile devices. So if you haven't yet downloaded the Onshape app, we have an app that runs on iOS devices, iPhone, iPad, but it also runs on Android devices, Android phones, Android tablets as well. So just keep in mind, you have true accessibility to your CAD data from anywhere. It could be, as I mentioned, mobile devices. It could be any computer, Windows, Mac, Linux, Chromebooks. Any of those will work because, again, Onshape itself is a cloud-based application. So our goal with Onshape is getting everyone working together with CAD on any device, anywhere. Now, the other thing I always like to mention is, of course, Onshape is professional 3D CAD. And when you think of professional 3D CAD, you think of just parts, assemblies, and drawings. That's what most professional 3D CAD systems have. Onshape itself is a bit different. Onshape has a lot of things that you wouldn't get in a standard professional 3D CAD system. So the point that I always like to make, at least early on, is that Onshape gives you frequent updates. Rather than maybe once a year updates, you get updates roughly every 3 weeks. So every 3 weeks, new features are being added. You have the ability to log in and see new functionality being there. We also have built-in version control. So with Onshape comes the ability to manage versions, create revisions, all the things that are typically associated with a PDM-like system, some kind of data management system. In other CAD applications, you have to invest in some kind of a PDM system to get that kind of functionality. In Onshape, that's a core part of how Onshape works. So built-in version control. The next thing I want to mention is read and write common CAD formats. So there's a long list of common CAD formats that exist out there in the world today, and chances are we can import and work with just about any of those formats. So if you're coming from another CAD system, or if you have this library of CAD data that you've built up over the years in another CAD system, chances are we can import and work with that CAD data. Now, the other thing I want to mention is it also means Onshape works really well alongside other CAD applications. We can, export to a number of different formats, which means we work well with maybe vendors or anyone else that you're working with outside of your company that needs access to that CAD data. Chances are we can work with a format that they support. So again, read and write common CAD formats, very big. If you have experience in other CAD applications, you have data in other CAD applications, we can work with it. The next thing I want to mention is entirely new methods of collaboration. And this one's particularly important because in Onshape, you can collaborate in real time on the same model. And that's something that no other CAD system will give you, is that ability to read and write common CAD formats and collaborate with others in real time. Because in Onshape, if you need to collaborate with someone, it may mean you need to share a file with them and share a certain model with them. In other traditional CAD applications, you do something like send an email, but in Onshape, we can literally just share a document. And it's just with a few clicks, we can work together on the same model at the same time. And this is something that no other CAD system offers. So real-time collaboration, it's not just the ability to simultaneously edit and so on, but it's also built in things like comments. Onshape has integrated comments that allow you to tag features and tag other people, and allows you to communicate inside of the document. Another example would be follow mode, where I can see the other person's screen in real time. All of these are examples of ways that we've improved the collaborative experience for CAD, and it's something that's very important for teams of users. When you're working with really anyone else, collaborating with them, and the headaches typically associated with collaborating with them, Onshape has worked to solve. So entirely new methods of collaboration, that's the next thing that I wanted to mention. But the last thing here is custom features with FeatureScript. And FeatureScript is a programming language developed by Onshape that allows you to build your own CAD feature. So essentially a custom CAD feature that does exactly what you tell it to. If you're at all interested in programming, this is definitely something that's worth pursuing. You can essentially build any kind of feature that you want, and it could do a lot of things. It could save you a lot of time. It can ensure that you have a consistent design. If you have that kind of shape where I'm always doing these certain profiles, I'm always finding myself tediously sketching these things, chances are you can automate it with something like a feature script feature. So if you're at all interested in writing code, definitely check out custom features with feature script. If you just do a search for feature script, you'll find a lot more info on that. But these are just some things I'd like to mention in general about Onshape before we get into the topic of the day. So for those new users out there, just some things to understand about Onshape. Now, the next thing that I wanted to get into is today's goals, of course. And as I mentioned before, you can think of this very much as like a crash course in Onshape, right? So we're not going to cover everything you'll need to model every part in the world, of course, but we're going to cover kind of the basics to get started. So we're going to tour the interface. We're going to build a simple part, create a part, assemble the part, and of course, create a drawing of that part. And so kind of at a high level, the day in the life of an Onshape engineer. How do I design a part? How do I put it into my assembly? And how do I create a drawing of the three important steps that every engineer needs to design their product? Now, I also want to take just a moment to show you how to import. It's very simple in Onshape, but it's a very important part as you're getting started. I'll walk you through the button, essentially, that allows you to import. So very easy. The last thing I want to mention, again, is feel free to ask any questions that you'd like. There's a questions dialog in the GoToWebinar control panel. Feel free to ask any question, and I'll do my best to stop and address them as we go through today's webinar. So that's kind of a short rundown of what the goals are. But again, think of this as like a high-level overview of Onshape. How do I get started? What do I do to start my part, assemble it, and create a drawing of it? All right, so let's dig into it. Now, there's one last slide that I have for you, and then we're going to jump right into Onshape, and that's 5 key takeaways. So if there's 5 things to take away from this webinar, these would be the 5 that I'd want to point out. The first thing, Onshape runs in a browser. One of the more common questions we get is, how do I download and install Onshape? And the answer is you don't. There's no download, there's no install. You log in through a browser and you have access to your CAD data. So remember, no downloads, no installs, no updates, none of that stuff is necessary in Onshape. So Onshape itself runs in a browser. The next thing I want to mention is a document in Onshape is a project level container. And I think for new users getting started, it's easy to think of a document as a single model, but it's not. A document can have hundreds of parts, as many sub-assemblies and assemblies as you want, as many drawings as you want. Even imported files can be stored in a document. So think of a document in Onshape as a project level container. It holds all parts, assemblies, drawings, miscellaneous files that you want, right? So it's not just a single model. Now, of course, tying into that, in the document, you have different tabs. And the tabs are kind of the key to getting around inside of Onshape's documents. The tabs for parts, tabs for assemblies, tabs for drawings, tabs for miscellaneous data. Maybe it's an app or it's a PDF that you're storing inside of the document. But the important thing I want to stress is inside of the document, you'll have all these different tabs. Each tab has a specific purpose, whether you're part modeling, assembly modeling, creating your drawing, or so on. Now, the last 2 things I want to mention is sharing and collaboration are built in, and data management is built in. And these are things that if you look at any other professional 3D CAD system, you have to purchase and or install separately. And so, there's a lot of extra products that go with a normal CAD system because they need a separate install for a sharing application. They need a separate install and purchase for a data management application. All of these capabilities are built into core Onshape. So you never need to download an Onshape viewer. You never need an Onshape PDM system. Those core capabilities are built in, and it's not something that you have to manage, install, purchase separately. So sharing and collaboration are built in. I'll show you an example of it in a bit. And also data management is built in. Again, I'll show you an example of that in just a bit. So these are just 5 key takeaways. If you had to take 5 things from this webinar, these are definitely the 5 things that I'd want to point out. But enough of that. Let's get into the webinar. Now, as I mentioned before, we're going to start at a very high level. And I want to start with the basics and walk through what it's like to build a simple part, and then assemble that part and create a drawing of it in the hour that we have. So we're going to whiz through things here. Now, the first thing I want to mention, of course, I've already briefly mentioned it, but I want to stress again, Onshape itself runs in the browser. So here you can see I'm running Chrome on a MacBook. You could be running Chrome, Opera, Firefox, Safari, any WebGL supporting browser that you want on any operating system that you want. Windows, Mac, Linux, Chromebooks, none of those things really matter. What I would stress, though, is make sure that you're using a WebGL supporting browser. And the main browser that I'm referring to here is Internet Explorer. You don't want to use Internet Explorer. If that's what you're currently using, try using Chrome. Try using Firefox, if you have a preference between those. But those are WebGL supporting browsers. Internet Explorer is not. Now, the same goes for Edge. Edge is currently not tested under our current configuration. It does have some WebGL support, but there's still some missing elements to it. So right now it's Chrome, Opera, Firefox, Safari, any of those browsers on any computer that you want, you can log into your Onshape data. Now you log in just by browsing to cad.onshape.com. And initially, after you log in, you're taken to the Documents page. And this is the Documents page. It's the first thing that you're greeted with when you log in. Now, the Documents page, as I mentioned before, is you can think of a document as a list of your project. This Documents page is simply a list of all the projects. I have a hydraulic steering pump project. I have, a variables project. So each one of these can contain dozens, hundreds of parts and subassemblies and drawings and so on. So again, when you first log in, this is your Documents page. It's your list of your projects. That's the best way to think of it. And if you want to open one, it's just a matter of left-clicking. Now, there are a few other important pieces of the interface that I want to mention, especially early on. One of the common questions that we get is, how do I import? I'm new to Onshape and I need to import a file. How do I do that? Under the Create icon in the top left, you'll have an option to import files. So you can import files. There's a long list of supported formats that I mentioned earlier. So chances are, if you have a CAD file in certain many formats, just import it into a document and you'll see it translated into Onshape. Now, another natural question here is, well, how do I go about creating a new document? And that's just above it. So you'll see Create and then Document. That will give you a new blank part and assembly to start working in. So again, creating a new document, importing files, both can be found from the top left corner, the Create button there. Now, below that is the filters, and the filters can be useful just for finding that document that you're looking for. So by default, you can see it takes me to recently opened, which means it's just going to show me all the documents that I've opened recently. But below that, I can filter by my documents, or documents created by me, or documents shared with me, right? If I'm looking for a specific document that's shared with me. We get into the concept of company-owned documents. Here I've got a company called Midwest Machine Tech. And I've even got the concept of teams. So in an Onshape, you can have company-owned documents and then share with teams within the company to allow them access to that document. So these get into a little bit more advanced sharing and permissions and so on. But I do want to mention you can filter by these things just as easily. Now we also have a way to tag our designs with labels. So if you have any labels and you want to tag a document with that and easily search by that, you can certainly do it. The last two things that I want to mention here are particularly important to new users. At the bottom, you have public and tutorials and samples. If you're the type that likes to learn from others, the public models are a great resource. If you left-click public, you'll see all these public models. These are models that others have shared deliberately, they've shared with the world as a resource. Whether you want to use it to build your own F1 car or you wanted to just see how an F1 car was modeled, you can look at the public document for it. So these are models that were shared by the owner publicly, and it's a great resource if you like to see how things are modeled. If you're the type that likes to take apart someone else's design and look at it and see how they constructed it, public models are a valuable resource. So that's one of the first things I would point out. There's literally thousands and thousands of models available in the list of public documents. Now, below that is tutorials and samples. Tutorials and samples are valuable if you need to, if you need a little bit more instruction-based learning. I want a video and I want an example part and I want to walk through a series of steps. Tutorials and samples are where you want to start. And tutorial 1 will give you kind of the basics of the tour of the interface and the important pieces. But then you're going to build a part, create an assembly, create a drawing, and import. So there are different tutorials for different purposes, but definitely a valuable resource if you're just getting started and you're looking for a way to learn Onshape. So public, tutorials, and samples, two important filters as you're getting started in your docs list here. Now, the documents page, as I mentioned before, is really just a list of documents, so we're going to skip by it, but I do want to mention two more things real quickly. First, search in the top right. I can do a search, say for bike, and anything with bike in the name will pop up. So a simple text search, but you can also do more complicated searches. Advanced searching is there where you can search by show me all drawings in the released state, right? So I can filter by that, or I can do all these kind of combinations of searches if I'm really trying to dig down and find something particular. Or, show me a part with, description of this, or part number that starts with this, So if you're looking for a little bit more advanced search functionality, all you need to do is click that drop down arrow on the right side of the search box. But again, search fairly straightforward. It allows you to search by documents, and you can search by all kinds of different things with that advanced search. All right, so the last thing I want to mention, I'm going to go to the top right here. I'm going to just call up first real quickly the App Store. If you're not familiar with it, Onshape has an App Store that allows you to do all kinds of neat things like rendering, CAM, finite element analysis, and fluid dynamics, data management apps like build and materials apps, content libraries like Trace Parts Library, a huge library of standard nuts and bolts and hardware to choose from. So all of these are examples of Onshape apps, and they integrate with Onshape in many situations, and they are great if you're looking for any of that kind of post-processing stuff, CAM, rendering, finite element analysis, and so on. So that's the Onshape App Store. Again, you'll find it in the top right corner, big button to the App Store. I'm going to skip by invite friends and share for now because I'll be covering these in just a moment, but there are two more things I want to mention in the top right. The help menu, very valuable for getting help, of course, but valuable links. Of course, our help is great. It's updated often, every 3 weeks with an update. You also get an updated help, and it's very specific. So if you're looking for what does this option do in this command, chances are help will have an explanation for you. So definitely check out the help. There's also links to our Learning Center, our videos and tutorial libraries, feature script documentation if you're interested in creating your own custom feature, and also keyboard shortcuts. Probably one of the more common questions that I get from new users. How do I create a keyboard, or how do I see the keyboard shortcuts? Now, we can't create custom keyboard shortcuts yet, but we do have a long list of keyboard shortcuts that are supported. So if you're interested in the keyboard shortcuts, you'll find them under the help menu. And there's different keyboard shortcuts for parts, sketching, drawings, assemblies, and so on. Right? So again, under the help, you'll find keyboard shortcuts. Also valuable resources, forums, what's new post discusses what's recently been added, using the feedback tool to give us any kind of feedback that you have. So valuable tools under that help menu. Now, the last thing I want to mention before we actually open up a model is under your account settings. So in the top right, you have your username. And if you click that, you have My Account. And under Preferences, you can do a lot of setting of default settings. And so commonly asked question when new users get started, how do I change my default units to metric? How do I change my zoom pan rotate settings so that it zooms the other way? Or, little things like that where I want to change a global setting to all Onshape documents. This is where you'll find them. So go under your username, choose Preferences, and you'll see all these options. I can change the default units. I can change the decimal length. I can change the view manipulation. If you've come from SolidWorks or Creo or AutoCAD and you want the mouse to behave the same way, you can change that under view manipulation. If you just want to reverse the scroll wheel, you can do that too. And you can also do things like add and remove tools to your shortcut toolbar. All right. So a lot of global settings that exist here if you're looking for a way to change a certain default setting in Onshape. So that's really the documents page. That's what you're going to first see when you log into Onshape. What I want to get into now is actually building a part. So we're going to jump into the bike frame. Now, what you may have noticed is I have several different tabs open here. Now, we're just an app and a browser, so you can have as many tabs open as you'd like. You can move them to as many monitors as you'd like, and Onshape doesn't care, right? So you can use that as much as you'd like. You can see I already have the bike frame open in this example. So what I want to do is walk you through a few of the basic pieces of the interface where you're actually modeling. And you can see now that we've opened up a document, we have some real commands here, some real work to be done. And this is where you're going to do the work in building your design. So let's start at the top left and work our way down into the interface. I'm going to start at the top left under the Onshape icon. Top left corner, if I left click that, it takes me back to the documents page, right? So if you're looking for a quick way to get out of a document, left click the Onshape logo in the top left corner. Now, moving to the right, we have the document menu. If you want to change the units of this document, or if I wanted to add properties to the document or rename the document, all of that can be done here. Next to that is manage versions and history. Now, I'm going to get into this in greater detail in just a bit, but as I mentioned before, Onshape doesn't have a need for a PDM system, a file management system. There are no files in Onshape. Everything's a database entry, and the advantage of that is we get automated history. Now, you'll notice nowhere in the interface in Onshape is there a save icon. You never have to hit save in Onshape. And the reason is because everything is automatically saved. The moment that you add a new feature, you insert a new part, you create a new drawing, all those things are automatically saved and visible in your history. I'm going to go over this in greater detail in just a bit, but just understand, again, that PDM level functionality of saving, checking in, checking out, all of that's not necessary in Onshape. Now, we also have the ability to create versions. So if you're creating revision A, revision B, we have that ability built in. But all of that's core Onshape. It's not something that you have to purchase or manage separately. Now, we've already discussed App Store. I'm going to skip that for now, and then I'm going to cover Share in just a moment. So let's move down to the next important piece of the interface, and that is the toolbar across the top here. Now, the important thing to keep in mind about the toolbar is this, yes, is where you're going to find your tools. So I'm in an assembly. I see options to insert. I see all the different mate types. This is where you're going to go to find the commands that you're looking for, but they'll change depending on what you're doing at that time. I'm in an assembly, so I see assembly tools, insert all the various mates and so on. If I were to jump into a part, you'd see part modeling tools here. If I were in a sketch, you would see sketch tools here. So just realize the toolbar is always in the same place here at the top, but the icons will change depending on what you're doing at that time. So this is your toolbar. Moving to the left here, we have our instance list. Now, if you've come from other professional 3D CAD systems, this should look pretty familiar. It's sometimes referred to as a feature tree or feature manager or feature list, and Onshape it's very similar, right? And in the assembly, I'm looking at all the parts and mates that make up the assembly, right? If I would jump into a part studio, you would see all the sketches and features that make up that part. So think of this as a list of everything that you've done to build the model at its current state. So that's the instance list or feature list, depending on where you're at. The next most important piece of the interface that I want to discuss is the tabs across the bottom. The reason these are important is, as I mentioned before, you have assemblies, you have parts, you have drawings, you may even have imported file-related data that you want to store within the document. You can do this by left-clicking the tabs across the bottom. Right? So here you can see I have a shock, here I have a dog bone link, here I have a frame assembly. All of them are parts in a part studio. Right? So each tab has its own purpose. You know, I modeled the bike frame by itself. I modeled the linkage arm by itself in their own part studio space. Then I bring them together in the assembly, right? So, and I access all those various pieces via the tabs across the bottom. Now, it's parts, assemblies, drawings, but it can also be imported data. So this is an example of a swing arm designed in SolidWorks. So this was designed in SolidWorks, imported into a document, and now I'm using it in my Onshape assembly. You'll notice that I have a tab here for swingarm.sldprt. That's the part that was imported into the assembly. So we're storing not just the original file, but also the translated file. So you can actually use that model in your assemblies if you choose to. Now, it's also miscellaneous files. It may not be CAD geometry. Maybe it's a PDF that I want to store with the document. You know, maybe I have this PDF and I need to be able to, reference this PDF inside my document. Maybe it's related to the project, like marketing material, like you see here, or maybe it's just, a spreadsheet or some G code that I use to machine the part. There's all kinds of examples I could give you of ways to store files inside of the document. And again, think of it as just a container for everything project related. All right, so we've discussed the toolbar, right? We've discussed the instance list or feature list, and we've discussed the tabs across the bottom. Now, the main pieces of the interface are very important. What I'd like to do now is walk you through building a simple part. Now, what I'd like to do is walk you through building something similar to this dog bone link, and then we're going to assemble that into the bike frame assembly. So let's get started. Now, I've already modeled the dog bone link. We're going to model it one more time for the sake of this webinar. And I'm going to walk you through from scratch building it. But we need a new part to do that. So I'm going to go to the bottom left corner. You'll see a plus icon there. And you'll see options to create a drawing, create an assembly, create a new part studio. So if you need to create something new in your document, this is how you do it. I'll left click, create part studio. And now we are in a new blank part in our document. Right, so we have our default planes, our origin, and we're ready to start designing. Now, in our example, I'm going to start a sketch on the front plane. So I'll left click the front plane, hit sketch, and now I'm in a sketch on that plane. Now, one important last step that I'd recommend, and this is just a general tip, not specific to sketching, but really anywhere in Onshape, is using the right-click menu. You can use the right-click menu to find a lot of context-sensitive options. I'm in a sketch, I'm on the front plane, but I'm not looking normal to the front plane. So I need to know, how do I rotate this around so I'm looking normal to the front plane? And the way we can do this, if I right-click, you'll see an option to view normal to sketch plane. So it's just one example of the right-click menu being very important in Onshape. But in general, sketching, parts, assemblies, even drawings, the right-click menu is very important. You're going to get a context-sensitive list of options. What I oftentimes tell users is try right-clicking something. Right-click a face, right-click a feature, and see what options are there. If you need to edit, delete, change something about that, chances are that option is in the right-click menu. So right-clicking on something, very important in Onshape. You'll get a list of options that apply to the thing that you're right-clicking on. All right, so now we are in a sketch on the front plane and we're normal to the front plane, so we can really start sketching. I'm going to start with a circle. Before I click it, one thing to notice that toolbar has changed. A moment ago, we were looking at assembly tools and then part studio tools. Now I'm in a sketch, and so I see sketch tools. So again, the toolbar will change depending on what you're doing. I'm going to start with a simple circle. So I'll left click the circle. And I start to move my cursor around, and what I want to point out is notice all of these references that wake up. Horizontal, vertical, horizontal, vertical. So it's telling me as I'm sketching, hey, you're creating a relationship to this origin. If I want to attach the circle to the origin, left click while I move my cursor over it. You see there it highlights. Left click, move my cursor out, left click again, and now I have my first circle in the sketch. Now, a circle, of course, is very simple, straightforward, but that's kind of the beginning of our shape. Now, what I want to do is sketch another circle. So I've created my first circle in the origin, and I want to sketch another circle to the right of the origin. And you notice as I move my cursor up, I get that reference saying, hey, this is horizontal to your origin. And I want to place another circle. So again, left click, move out, left click, and now I have two circles in my sketch. Now, what I'd like to do next is just add a simple dimension. I don't know the size of either of these circles, so I'll select dimension, left click the circle, left click to place the circle, and then we can add our value in. Now, to insert a value, all you need to do is type in a value, let's say 25, hit enter, and now I've dimensioned that circle. I've added a dimension to it. Now, one thing I want to point out, notice that the circle on the left is black, the circle on the right is blue. In Onshape, you get that visual feedback as to the level of definition of your sketch. So I can see visually the circle on the left is fully defined. It has all the constraints and dimensions necessary. The circle on the right is underdefined. It does not have the dimensions or constraints necessary to define its shape. In fact, if I left-click drag, you can see the diameter will change. If I left-click drag the point, I can shift it left to right. So there's still some dimensions that need to be added to that circle on the right. My point in this is you'll know that based on the color. Now you see this is black, that's blue, indicating I still need some work left on this circle. So we'll add another dimension. Let's add a dimension, let's say 20. And I still need to add a dimension for a distance between the center and the origin. So left click, move my cursor down, and left click one more time. And that value should be 85. So 85, enter. And now we have our first fully defined sketch. What I mean by fully defined, you have both circles showing up as black. So we have our two circles, both dimensions for circles and the distance between them. Let's take this one step further. What I want to do is I want to sketch lines that join these two circles. But before I do that, I want a line going right through the middle that represents the center. So I'm going to select line, then construction from the toolbar, then draw a construction line from point to point. Right? Now I have a construction line joining the 2 points. The reason that I want that construction line is I'm going to draw another line from circle to circle, and then I want to mirror it to the other side. So we'll sketch our first line. Notice as I move my cursor over the circle, it highlights, indicating, hey, you're creating a constraint to this point on the circle. Left click, and now I have a line that's attached to both circles. And I'm just using those visual cues, the highlighting, telling me you're creating a constraint. So I've got my simple line joining the 2 circles, and I want to mirror this line about this construction line, which is why we needed it. So I'll select the mirror command from the toolbar, select my mirror line, then select the line I want to mirror about. That's the better way to phrase that. And then the line that I want to mirror. And you'll see it mirrors it to the other side. Now the natural question is, well, couldn't you have just sketched another line? And the answer is yes, but the mirror command gives us that symmetry. So if we change the dimension, it remains centered about the construction line, which is a nice thing to have in this case. Which means all I need to do here is add a dimension between the 2. And let's give it a value of 16. Okay. So now we've got our sketch back to a fully defined state. We've sketched 2 lines joining the 2 circles. One other thing I wanted to point out is notice that the inside of this contour is shaded a slightly darker color than the outside graphic space. This is an outside just white. This is clearly a darker shade of gray. And the idea behind that is to let you know that this is a closed shape. You can use it for a feature. So you don't have to go to the feature and then figure out you have some kind of a problem. You can see that right away in Onshape because anything closed automatically shades a darker color than the rest. So it's just one more example of the visual cues that you get that your sketch is good. So we've created 2 circles, 2 lines that join them, about a mirrored line, and we're almost done. The next thing I want to do is add 2 more circles on the inside of these 2 previous circles. But I'm going to do this a bit differently, and I'm going to do it differently on purpose. So I'm going to sketch 2 circles just out here in empty space. Right? Now, of course, if you were doing this, you would probably set these right on top of the 2 previous ones. But I want to show something with this. So everything I've done up to this point has been automatically constrained. And what I mean by that is you'll notice all of these constraints were all done as I was sketching. When I moved my cursor up and I saw that reference line and I left click, I created a constraint. When I moved my cursor over the circle to start my line and I left click, I created a constraint. So a lot of the constraints that you create will be automatic. You don't have to do anything for them. If you want to see them, you can check Show Constraints in the sketch dialog, and you'll see these little flags appear. Each flag is a constraint. If you want to delete a constraint, just left-click a flag and delete it. How are you sure that the lines that have been mirrored are horizontal? That's because of the horizontal constraint. As I was sketching it, I sketched a horizontal line, and it adds the constraint automatically. Now, I could easily sketch a line and then apply a horizontal constraint, but in many situations, it does that as you're sketching. It's just not a necessity. But there will be situations where you need to create constraints yourself, and that's why I've sketched these 2 circles out in empty space, just to walk you through that process. So essentially, I want this circle concentric with this circle concentric with this circle, and this circle should have the same diameter. So it's a few different constraints. Let's start with the diameter. When I change the diameter of this one, I want this one to also change. In Onshape, we call that an equal constraint. To apply any constraint, doesn't matter what the constraint is, any constraint, you left-click the entities and select the constraint from the toolbar. I want these two circles to be equal. Left-click one circle, left-click the second circle, and then click equal in the toolbar. Now I've added an equal constraint between those two circles. If I change the diameter of one, they both update. So again, think of this as, you're manually adding constraints. Not always necessary, but there will be times when it is. The next constraint that I want to apply is I want to make this circle concentric with this circle. And the same goes for here. This circle concentric with this one. So again, left click, then choose the constraint from the toolbar. In this case, concentric. Right? Left click, then choose concentric from the toolbar. So again, the process of adding manual constraints is very simple. Left click the geometry, select the constraint from the toolbar, just like we've done here. The last thing I have to do here is add a dimension, and we'll give that a value of 12. Right. Now we're back to a fully defined sketch. So now I'm ready to take this to the next step. I'm ready to take this from a 2D sketch to creating a 3D model. We're going to use the extrude command to do that. Now, if you've come from other CAD applications, if you come from a SolidWorks or Inventor or Creo, one of those other professional 3D CAD applications, you may be familiar with the process of trimming sketch entities. In fact, in many other CAD systems, you would be forced to trim these sketch entities out so that you had one enclosed contour. That's not the case in Onshape. I can go straight from here to extrude and set my extrude depth, in this case to 25 millimeters. So my point is, don't worry a lot about trimming sketch entities up. That's not a requirement in Onshape. You can use the sketch as is. So I've clicked the extrude command from the toolbar. It automatically grabs the sketch that it was in and sets it to a blind depth of 25 millimeters. But we also have other options. If you've come from the SolidWorks, Creo, CATIA, type of background, these should look pretty familiar. Up to next, up to face, up to part, up to vertex, through all very common in conditions that allow you to build a little bit more design intent than just using blind values. But we're going to start with a simple blind value of 25 millimeters. I can hit the green check OK, and now I have my first sketch and first extrude in the part. And you can see them listed on the left here. Sketch 1, extrude 1. If I need to edit or delete or change anything in it, I just right click and you'll see those options. Edit, delete, and so on. So we've created our first feature. We've created our first extrude, of course. I want to do this one more time. This time I'm going to start a sketch on the top plane. So I selected the top plane. I use the S key to bring up the shortcut toolbar and start a sketch. I'm a big fan of keyboard shortcuts, so I also use the N key for normal too. But again, if you're getting started, stick with those icons until you can see, a keyboard shortcut that makes you save some time. If you're a fan of keyboard shortcuts, again, you'll find them under the help menu. So what I want to do next is sketch a few lines. Left click, left click, left click, left click, and now we've got a few simple lines. Now what I want to do is add a few dimensions, of course. So we'll add a dimension from here to here of 9. Right? We'll add a dimension from here to here of, let's say, 170. Right? And we'll add a dimension from point to plane of, say, 20. Notice with all of these dimensions, I did not predefine what kind of dimension it was. I didn't have to go to angular dimension and click angle. I didn't have to go to point plane dimension. All I need to do is left click the things that I want to dimension. So there's only one dimension tool, and it should be useful in any type of dimension that you're trying to create. So now that I have these lines sketched, I want to offset all 3 of them at once. So I'll select the offset command, and I'll left-click drag one of the lines. It will automatically grab everything in that chain of lines, enter a value of 8 for our offset, And now we have an offset of 8 millimeters for those 3 lines. So offsetting your geometry is really simple. Even if you have a lot of geometry that you want to offset at once, it's just a matter of left click dragging one piece of it and it grabs everything. Now the last thing we have to do here is sketch some lines. All right, closing this shape up. And I want to attach this line to the edge of the part on both ends. Now, again, if you've come from Inventor, Creo, CATIA, SolidWorks, they all have some form of this command, whether they call it convert entities or project, or Onshape refer to it as use. But essentially, you're grabbing edges, faces, sketch geometry from previous features and pulling them into the current sketch. What I want to do is I want to grab this edge of the model and convert it to a line. And the same goes for this edge on the far right of the model. So I'll select the use command in the toolbar, then select the edge that I want to use. And what will happen is it will convert it into a line. So now you'll see there's a line there on the end. Same thing over here, line there on the end. And now I can constrain my line to that line. Left click, will make them coincident, right? Left click, coincident. So I just added the constraints necessary to the ends of my part. Now we can take this second sketch and extrude it. So I'm going to go from here to the extrude command, and we're ready to create our extrude. Now, one question that often comes up in Onshape is, well, where's the extruded cut command? Where's the revolved cut command? I see extrude, revolve, sweep, and loft, but I don't see the cut equivalent. It's important to point out cut or remove is simply an option inside of each command. So in the extrude command, in the revolve or sweep or loft command, you have this option to remove. And as the name implies, instead of adding material to your part, you're removing it or cutting it, right? So we have add, which is what we've done, which is what it was default. It will add this to the previous feature. We can say this is a new part, which will create a separate part in our part studio. This gets into a little bit more advanced topics of multi-part modeling, but it's there as an option. And we also have an option for intersect. And intersect will give us only what's shared between the part and this feature. So you can see in this case, intersect gives us that bent dog bone link shape that we're looking for. All right. Now, up to this point, if you've come from a professional 3D CAD system, a lot of this should look pretty familiar. Sketches and features are not a new concept, right? These are things that have been around for a long time in CAD. What we wanted was something that was very easy to adopt, easy to get started in, but that had a lot of extra capabilities. And one of those things that's very unique to Onshape is its collaboration tools. So if you wanted to share a document, work together with another engineer, another person, you could click share and enter their email address. Right? I enter their email address. I define their permissions. Very important step. Edit, view. I can define you're allowed to view, but not export, not copy, maybe add a comment. So I have very granular controls over the level of permission that I'm giving to the person I'm sharing to. Now, what's really unique about this is they can work with you at the same exact time. And the reason that's so big is if you think of traditional CAD, think of traditional file-based CAD systems like SolidWorks or Inventor, one of those. If you wanted to share with someone, you sent them a file. And you couldn't work together in the same model because that's files, no one can. So you waited for them to get their work done, and then they sent it back to you, and then you inevitably have to figure out what they did and then work around it to build whatever you need to build. In Onshape, you both are looking at the same set of data at the same exact time. What that means is, if you ever used a Google Docs, for instance, and you work with someone in a Google Doc, the moment they start typing, you instantly see it, right? The same concept applies in Onshape. So the moment they start creating new features, you instantly see them. In fact, you can see the person I've shared with is creating a new feature. There's a little visual cue there that they created a new feature. There's also an icon here in the bottom left indicating this is the tab they're in. There's another icon or visual cue here in the top right indicating this is the document they're in. So I can see who's in the document, what tab they're in, and if they're creating new features in the document. Now, the really unique thing here is the moment that anyone makes a design change. Let's say that, the person I've shared this with decides to add a series of fillets, let's say. The moment they accept that feature, the moment they hit the green check OK, you're going to instantly see it update. So you can see there were fillets added to this part, and I didn't do that. That was done by the person I've shared with. They didn't have to save. They didn't have to check in, merge, any of those things. They simply saw it update right away. So real-time collaboration, whether you're in the same room or across the world, if someone makes a change, anyone in the document that has permission makes a change, it updates instantly for everyone. So you never have to worry about, is this the right version? Do I need to get an older version? Is this the right file? So on. In Onshape, there's only one version, and it's the latest. So real-time collaboration between users, I can easily make changes to the design. Let's say that the person I've shared this with wanted to change the appearance. They might edit the appearance, make that change. The moment they hit that green check to accept it, I instantly see it update on my screen. So real-time collaboration between users. The biggest advantage, I think, is just always being aware of that latest state of the design. You never have to worry about, is this old? Am I working on an old version and wasting my time? Now, real-time collaboration is one big benefit, but I mentioned before that Onshape has built-in data management. So everything that we've done up to this point has been automatically saved. You'll notice I didn't hit save once in this whole demonstration, and that's because it's done automatically. So if I go into the versions and history, I can see every little change done to this document going all the way back to the moment it was created. If I mouse over it, it tells me who made that change and when. So it's very easy for me to say, what changes were made and who made them. Not just me. Maybe I've shared this with others. I want to see what they've done as well. You can see all of that listed in the history. So I can see who did it and when. If I don't like something that they've done, it's easy for me to just restore to a moment before that point. So again, think of this as, very much like an infinite undo. You have everything in your history. Everything you've ever done in the document is listed in your history, and you can find any point in that history and say, let's restore to this point, because I don't care for the changes, whatever it may be. So these are capabilities that are traditionally associated with very expensive PDM systems. So if you were to go to a SolidWorks or an Inventor or one of those types of applications and expect to get this level of functionality, you would need to spend an extra amount on PDM systems. That's not the case in Onshape. This is core Onshape. Nothing I've shown you here is any special packages. Everything's basic Onshape. So versions and history track everything that we do in the document. That's also why you never need to worry about saving. You never need to worry about computers crashing or hard disk crashing or anything like that, because the moment you create it, it gets stored. All right, so that's a quick intro into part modeling and a little bit on collaboration. What I'd like to jump into next is some basics on assembly modeling in Onshape. And this is another scenario where we've tried to do things just a bit different. If you've come from another professional 3D CAD system, this is going to be a bit different, but the idea is to try and save you time. So here I have the bike frame assembly, and this is the assembly we were looking at earlier. And I want to take the dog bone link and insert it into the assembly and mate it into place, attaching it to the swing arm and so on. So I'm going to insert the dog bone link, just left click it, and we'll place it out here in space. So now I've inserted my dog bone link, but it has no constraints. It's free to move in any direction. If I left click, you can see it's rotating. I can move it along an axis. So there is no constraints holding this dog bone link. It's floating, so to speak, in space. What I want to do next is I want to mate this link to the swing arm. Now, the advantage of doing this with Onshape's approach is you get far fewer mates than you would in a traditional file-based CAD system. So in a SolidWorks or an Inventor or Creo, Cretia, one of those kinds of applications, you would use a combination of faces. So if I were mating a bolt to a hole, for example, in SolidWorks, it might be 3 different mates to position that bolt into the hole. In Onshape, that would be one fasten mate. And the difference is we don't use a combination of faces to define a part's location. We use what we refer to as mate connectors. And you can think of them as connection points. What point does this part connect to the frame? what point does this part connect to the swing arm? Grab those points and mate them rather than using, again, a combination of faces. And the idea is just far fewer mates and far easier assemblies to troubleshoot. So let me give you an example. I want to attach the link arm to the frame. It still needs to be able to pivot. Right? This is a bike frame. It has suspension that travels, which means the swing arm needs to be free to rotate on either side. In that case, it would be a revolute mate. So I choose revolute mate from the toolbar. And then I mouse over the part that I want to mate. And what you'll notice is these little white points appear. These little white points appear along with a coordinate system attached to them. And essentially, these are your mate connection points, your mate connectors. And this is where I say, okay, I want to take this point on this part, and I want to mate it to this point on the frame. Right? So I left click each point, brings them together, and now I have one mate that's defined my part's location. Right? I don't need to add 2 or 3 mates between faces just to get that one thing into place. So the idea behind our mates is you take the points, you bring them together. The type of mate that you choose defines how much motion is between the two parts, but it's very easy to take and mate a part with one mate. Right? A bolt to a hole, I always give that example because it's so common. If you made a bolt into a hole, in Onshape that would be one mate. In other CAD systems, it might be as many as 3. So just far fewer mates, far simpler approach to assembly design. Now, it doesn't mean that we lack any kind of capabilities in complex assembly motion. So I can still mate the other end of this part, if I choose to the swing arm, which is the necessary bit. But it just saves me so much time when we start talking about things like fasten mate. Again, mating a bolt to a hole. Mating a bolt to a hole is far faster in Onshape than it would be in other CAD applications. So now I've mated both ends of the link arm into place. And if I grab and drag, you can see it pivots just like the suspension that I would expect. Right? So that's the ultimate test. Left click, grab and drag, and you can see that assembly pivoting. Now, the link arms are an important bit of that. They just attach the frame to the swing arm, but mating everything into place is very easy. And the thing I would stress in Onshape is that we do not use faces, combinations of faces to define a part. We use that mate connection point. Far simpler approach to mates. You can see I have 10 parts and 12 mates. And then in more traditional applications, you might have 10 parts and 30 plus mates. So it just depends what you're trying to do, but we think the approach to assemblies is far simpler than many other professional 3D CAD systems out there. All right, so we've covered in a nutshell, kind of the interface, basic part modeling, assembling our parts, and a very simple example. The last thing I want to discuss, we have just a couple minutes left here, is drawings. And of course, creating a drawing, creating a part, assembling a part are 2 very important steps. But none of it is worth anything unless I can get it out to the shop floor and actually have it manufactured. And that's where drawings come into play. Now, drawings are integrated right into Onshape. They're no different than any other tab. So if I go click the plus icon on the bottom left, I see create drawing. And I can choose my template, and I'm off and running. Here I'm going to choose an ISO template. Okay. And now we've started a new blank drawing in our document. Right? And now I can start to insert parts and assemblies if I wanted to, add my dimensions, section views, fill out my title block. For the sake of time, I'm not going to go through each one of these steps. But it's very easy for me to project a few views out and, maybe add, a detail view. Let's do a detail view in the corner here. Detail view, section views, auxiliary views, angle section views, all kinds of stuff is available. I'm not going to go through all of the tools right now, but it's very easy for me to lay out all the various dimensions and start to really fill out my drawing. Okay. We've even got ways to map the title block to other properties in the drawing and so on. So, just for the sake of time, I'm going to skip by this, but again, realize drawings are integrated right into Onshape documents. You can see there's just another tab here for my drawing. And it's just a matter of inserting your views, adding your dimensions, your detail views, your section views. Maybe it's bills of materials and balloons that you want to do. All of that is built in there as well. So that is, again, you think of it very much as a crash course in Onshape. And we want to discuss part modeling, assembly modeling, and of course drawings. at a very high level. So if you're just getting started, hopefully this was a good introduction for you. I am going to stick around and answer any questions that you have. So again, there's a questions dialog there in the GoToWebinar control panel. Feel free to ask any question. I'll stick around for a few more minutes and make sure that I've addressed all the questions. But that's what I had. Thank you, everyone, and have a good day.